Once again, thank you so much for joining me here today. It is my honor, pleasure, and privilege to be able to talk to such a vast variety of people with so many talents. And let's discuss a little bit of GRC and min and max of multi-framework optimization. Who's with me? Woo! Yeah, let's get started. All right. So welcome. Thank you, NIST, who do amazing work, ISC2, ISACA, and besides Tampa, without whom we wouldn't be here today. So a little bit about me. I am Akash Kishore Arcilla. You can choose to call me Sky. I have a few things that I've done in my career. And moving on. This is GRC and the min and max of multi-framework optimization. Let's break down how I plan to address that. So we'll discuss our objectives, go over a bit of GRC, drill down into each one of its components. We'll take a peek at an example, and basically that's how it goes. Sounds good? All right, let's get started. So my role here, first and foremost, would be to attempt to share a little bit of what I know. So first and foremost, whenever you receive any information, it is paramount to consider the role and objectives of the source of that information. Here, I am delivering this presentation from the point of view of cybersecurity senior management team member. Internal, external doesn't really matter. And I'm going to talk to you about GRC. Now, who here is familiar with GRC? Awesome. All right. Anyone want to take a stab at a quick definition? All right, good enough. Lots of important information there. All right, so the way I like to define GRC is that GRC is a set of professionals who evaluate, select, and implement frameworks, standards, and policies, which they then assess, review, and revise. Any objections? Does that sound good? OK. Now, let's break down each layer and identify a good reference for one. So governance, we have NIST CSF 2.0, risk 837. And for compliance, let's take FISMA as an example. We have SP 853B Ref 5. Sounds good? All right. Anyone know what is NIST? Yes, sir.
The National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Yes. And the bigger question is, who is NIST? Well, NIST is a team, just like GRC professionals, made up of some of the best scientists who are a lot like you and I. I wish I could put all of them up here, but for now, from top left to bottom right, we have Director of NIST, Dr. Lori Locascio, Associate Director for Innovation and Industry Services, Mohan Bahar, Kevin Stein of Information Technology Laboratory. A lot of what we are about to discuss comes from divisions under his leadership. We have Delvin Brockett, Associate Director for Management Resources, Dr. Charles Romine, Associate Director for Laboratory Programs, and last but not the least, Dr. Jason Boehm, Chief of Staff for NIST. And within ITL, we have Applied Cybersecurity Division, where we have Acting Chief Director Rodney Peterson. We have him to thank for the NICE framework. Naomi Lefkowitz, Senior Privacy Policy Advisor. She's actually leading the charge on protecting individuals' privacy into information technologies. And we have, last but not the least, Sherilyn Pascoe, Director of National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. She's the queen bee responsible for the frameworks we are about to discuss. She's also done a ton of work on the Hill, like the AV START Act and the Innovation and Competition Act. And at the bottom, we have Natalie Martin, Deputy Director and a collaborative talent magnet, without whom a lot of collaboration that happens within NIST wouldn't happen. So what exactly is NIST? So some of you might be aware, it was founded in 1901, currently under US DOC. Its mission is to promote innovation and industrial competitiveness by advancing measurement science, standards, and technology in ways that enhance economic security and improve our quality of life. So this is from their website, and they specialize in measurement science, rigorous traceability, as anybody who's read their standards are concerned, and development and use of standards. Their values are perseverance, integrity, inclusivity, and excellence. Moving forward. Does anyone want to take a stab at defining what is a framework? All right. NIST Special Publication 800-152, which deals with federal cryptographic key management systems, defines a framework as a layered structure indicating what kind of programs can or should be built and how they would interrelate. Some computer system frameworks also include actual programs, software programs, indicating that not all frameworks are just software, nor are they just logical. They can be interrelated. And they can specify programming interfaces or offer programming tools, such as you were discussing, sir, with automation of GRC. That can be a part of a framework. A framework may be a set of functions within a system and how they interrelate. The layers of an operating system, the layers of an application subsystem, how communication should be standardized at some level of a network, so on and so forth. A framework is generally more comprehensive than a protocol and more prescriptive than simply a structure. We are going to get abstract up in here. All right, let's talk about NIST CSF 2.0. If you go onto the NIST website and look up what exactly NIST CSF 2.0 is, you'll get this extract of text, where it defines CSF core, organizational profiles, and CSF tiers. Those who are already into GRC might have already read this. Those who are not, for them, this can be a little intimidating. So with your permission, I'm going to take a little bit of an interpretative step here and perform a basic abstraction and simplification, which is a fancier way of saying, let's break it down with 8 or less WH questions. So what is NIST? It's a blueprint for a logical cybersecurity infrastructure by some of the best scientists known to man to help everyone now, anywhere. And how do we do that? Let's get started. Some GRC professionals may be familiar with the terms GRC, management, and internal controls. NIST CSF uses the terminology of core, profiles, and tiers. And here we have layers. Layers are going to come into picture quite a bit here. And one interpretation of this can be, from a mathematical standpoint, functions, posture, and ability. So let's discuss the core. If NIST CSF 2.0, as a logical structure in the information space where ones and zeros exist, is a cube, then the core is looking at it from the top-down point of view. It's the top surface of the cube. This is the core. Many of you may have already seen it. It's nice and circular, isn't it? Kind of like Iron Man's core, you know? So it contains govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, and my favorite, recover. Going further down into the core, we can analyze it a little bit further, it goes into functions, which are then split into categories, which are then split into subcategories. And let's take a look at what those look like a little bit more in detail. Some of you may be familiar with this table already. So we have, for example, govern, that goes into organizational context and risk management strategy, and then it keeps getting further broken down. Are we good so far? All right. So that was the core looking from the top down of the cube. Let's discuss what I understand them to mean by profiles. So if core was looking at it from the top down, profiles are like slicing the cube into smaller sections. So what they mean by this is like we currently have the current profile, and there is a target profile that we are trying to get to. We'll get into a little bit more into detail about what those are. But each and every slice is like a subsystem. So we have end users. We have an end user slice. We have an HRIS, Human Resources Information System slice. Then we have a manufacturing floor slice. And then when you put all these slices together, you have your entire supra system that we are attempting to address from this CSF 2.0. Okay. And then this is how we handle the profile. This is essentially the profile life cycle, which goes through scoping, gathering needed info, creating the organizational profile itself, analyzing the gaps, and then implementing an action plan to update the profile. With me so far? Sounds good. Now, let's try to understand what I understand by what they mean of tiers. So if we had the top as the core, and then we had slices of profiles, tiers are basically how full each of the pixels within that cube gets. It's how densely do we understand the information system infrastructure from a logical perspective into that framework. And they give us 4 types of tiers, which is partial, risk-informed, repeatable, and adaptive. Think of these like maturity within the framework. Now, let's get into a little bit of NIST SP 837 risk management framework. So we attempted to understand what exactly are we dealing with from an information logical structure point of view, which is our information systems infrastructure. And now, basically, what we are trying to do is taking the same cube and then looking at it from a different point of view. For consistency's sake, if we were to call the top view as core, let's call it core here as well. It's not actually called core in the standard. This is just me taking a little bit of a creative liberty. So you might be familiar with this little graphic, which is taken thanks to the actual publication. It goes into understanding the NIST, our information systems infrastructure, the supra system, from the point of view of risk management with prepare, categorize, select, implement, assess, authorize, and monitor. Now, NIST RMS also has tiers, which is, in this case, those are vertical, horizontal. And the standard in itself gives us 3 layers, which is organizational, mission and business process, and information system. And we have reporting lines that go through the organizational, mission, and information system layers to inform risk information. Going further in depth, we can take an example of the prepare at organization level and see it goes through risk management roles, strategy assessment, control baselines, common control identities, impact levels, and continuous monitoring strategy. So if you haven't seen the publication yet, then this is layer 1. And this is how it further breaks down into the next layer, which is system level. you can see the manner in which the information needs to be sliced at different layers requires different tools. Further, we have NIST SP 853 Ref 5, security and privacy controls for information systems. From a compliance standpoint, this is what you could use to audit against. You can do it yourself or have somebody else do it. And these are the control sets that are defined within it. So we have everything from access controls to supply chain risk management. This is what a control looks like within the standard. So if, again, for those of us who are new to the field, this is what a control looks like, where we have a control reference identifier right here. Any data set needs good references, and that's a very good way to reference. Then we have what the control is trying to assess. So that's basically like the title, the actual verbiage of the control. That's the base control. Then discussion, which is like more explanation about it, a lot of related controls. And then we have additional information regarding the control that supplements what the control is trying to achieve, or control objective given additional strength. Now, let's talk about framework alignment. Why would we want to align different frameworks? So in this case, for example, we can align them for the reasons of compliance. So let's say we want to get certified against, we want to be compliant for FISMA purposes, and we are using NIST 800 SP 53B Ref 5 for that purpose. So how would we align it? So from a governance standpoint, we would go into CSF 2.0. And this is an example of if you were to go on the NIST website and follow this link, you would end up with a spreadsheet that contains information regarding the CSF 2.0 framework itself. And this is what that framework looks like. How many of you have already seen this before? Awesome. I'm actually sharing something that might be new to you. OK, great. So it may look intimidating to those who are not seasoned professionals in reading such tables. But what we have here is the same information getting broken down further and further and further with references on the right-hand side. So this is basically the primary objective, which is govern. When we speak of governance, risk, and compliance, first part of that is governance. And within that, GRC, we are using NIST CSF 2.0 as our reference point to govern. Within CSF 2.0, the first point that we have is govern. The organization's cybersecurity risk management strategy, expectations, and policy are established, communicated, and monitored. This is step one for being able to start governing our cybersecurity logical infrastructure within an organization. Did I go too fast through the previous slides if this is new to you? OK. All right. So when it comes to any information, slicing and dicing it from a different perspective allows us to have different insights into it. From the governance standpoint, what we are looking at here is the primary objective. How do we get started with governing anything? Let's try to have some kind of strategy, some expectations, and establish a policy, make sure it's communicated and monitored. So how do we do that exactly? So risk management strategy for governance. Then it breaks down further. There are many more lines here. And this is basically the core of GRC. This is what GRC folks do most of the time. So we have a table. We have one objective. We have subparts of that objective, and then specific tasks related to that. And that's how this table goes. So within the risk management strategy, the organization prioritizes constraints, risk tolerance, and appetite statements, and assumptions are established, communicated, and used to support operational risk decisions. Did that make sense? Awesome, awesome, love to hear it. So how do we do that exactly? So this is further guidance that breaks down into tasks. So risk management objectives are established. and agreed to by organizational stakeholders. So this is the next step. And then, what do we do after that? So risk appetite and risk tolerance statements are established, communicated, and maintained. So basically, when you speak of GRC, you take the standard, you try to understand what it's trying to say, then you go into your organization, talk to the right people, stakeholders, people who get affected by those decisions, people who get to make those decisions, and then you start implementing it step by step by step. Yes, sir?
So this is like, and it's probably an obvious question, but this is like strategic, and you're not talking about tactical steps for actually doing anything. It's the strategy to get to those tactical steps?
Yes. Yes. So one of the reasons why I wanted to go about it from a cube standpoint, if I may, is that so when it comes to science, a lot of fields have very not so clear lines. So take, for example, the line between physics and mathematics. Where does mathematics end and physics begin? There is, kind of delineation. So when you get down to this level within information systems like security, so what we are talking about here is cybersecurity risk management strategy. That's our objective. But now we have advanced so far into the field that this is digging deep into information sciences. Like, how much do we split apart things before they become very basic abstract of that thing? So yes, ma'am.
Okay, if you miss one of those steps, say you miss GBR and M01, which I don't know how you can get 02 without 01, but anyways, if you miss one of those, then that is not completely aligned, is that correct?
Yes, you're right. And that doesn't, so here's how cybersecurity, as I see it, works now. We are digging very deep into information sciences. It's like, how do we understand data completion? How do we understand data integrity? Completeness, accuracy, availability, integrity, like all of these things, we are digging very deep down into them now, because that's where a lot of the attacks are happening. Like when you say data integrity violations, what do we mean by that exactly? So in order for us to properly address integrity violations, data integrity violations, we have to, from a defense standpoint, we have to attack it from a very abstract layer. The more withdrawn the attackers get from actual hardware, the more withdrawn we have to get from actual hardware as well. That's why we are at a level which is very basic, fundamental information sciences. Yes, sir?
Well, can I add?
Yes, please.
So all the frameworks that I've have experience with, the number one first step is your inventory, right?
Yes.
Inventory is everything.
Yes.
To include your information types, right? The information type is what stores, processed, transmitted, displayed, or received on the information system. Information types have a security watermark
Yeah.
of confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Yes.
Some security is a low, low, low. Why do I care? Some security watermarks are high, high, high. Holy crap, something bad's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then just enough security is where you have to balance, and that's where these frameworks and the controls are trying to get you, but you have to know your inventory first. What information is going to be on your system? Mine could just be business Rolodex. My business phone number, business email. Yours might be clients with, equity, stuff like that, that you want a high confidentiality on that no one needs to see except the folks you need to know.
Right.
And then your frameworks lead to controls. Your controls are the guardrails that are put in place to protect the CIA of your data that's on the system.
Okay. And then you said watermarks, you mean that's like class tagging, you mean, classification tagging?
Low, moderate, or high watermark, right, of security.
Yes.
Some things just need just enough username and password. Other things need encryption with the customer managed keys and multi-factor authentication, right? I need more layers to get to the data on the high than I do on the low.
Yep.
You can't protect what you don't really have.
Exactly. And so to know what we have, what is it to know something? That's where we start getting this abstract. It's like you said, and a few layers above that is like, we have data parity checks. Like, we have, I don't want to get too into electronics and like buffer overflows and But so, as our attackers get more and more advanced, we have to get more and more advanced in defending. And the way we get more and more advanced in defending is this, more abstract. So we get into what exactly is information, like what information do we have. So when we say information about information, like, that's why the cube is an example wherein we have an information suprasystem regarding everything that's downstream from it. So that includes people, processes, and technology. So when we get into people and processes, technology, very easy to understand, ones and zeros, hardware, people and processes. Then we get into like a lot of stuff that need to know, but like, so as far as something that can be as broadly applied from things that have defense implications to general public, this is an excellent framework where it tries to cover all of that. That's why the more simple something is, the harder it was to create. Like, and this is, as far as this goes, like it's pretty simple to follow, where somebody new to the field can still understand it. So breaking down something like governance to this degree is starting at organizational cybersecurity risk management strategy. So what does that mean exactly? So do we know what our priorities are? Do we know what our constraints are? Like how much is the budget? Like where are our system boundaries exactly? How many people do we have, et cetera, et cetera. So then risk management objectives are established, agreed upon by the organizational stakeholders, and then risk appetite and risk tolerance statements are established. So again, like these are like, when it comes to governance and compliance, like you can never be 100%, because every time you approach something that you think is complete, you discover something more that's beyond that boundary. Just like learning, we are all students, and I'm happy to learn something from you today. So that's our governance. Then let's get into risk management. So that was looking at the same cube from a governance standpoint. How would senior management look at it? And this is from a risk management standpoint, wherein what do we mean by risk management? So how do we align these different objectives and viewpoints? The governance viewpoint was that table. The risk management or risk professional might look at it from this angle, whereas we have the same, essentially the component from a completely different point of view of looking at it from an information science standpoint, which is risk management strategy. So 837 R2 defines it as all of this, where we have a task which establishes a risk management strategy for the organization that includes a determination of risk tolerance. Then what are the potential inputs to do that? We have organizational mission statement, we have organizational policies, which the governance side also looks at. Then we have organizational risk assumptions, constraints, priorities, trade-offs, etc. Then what are the expected outputs of this process if we were to take the same object essentially and look at it from a risk management standpoint, which is a risk management strategy and statement of a risk tolerance, which then fits into our governance, if you recall, inclusive of information security and privacy risk. So I'm trying to keep it very close to cybersecurity risk, but if you're trying to follow me, like looking at it from an abstract information point of view, this is, what we're trying to do is define risk management strategy, and that isn't necessarily constrained to just cybersecurity. So, so who is primarily responsible for this? It would be the head of the agency. So when we speak GRC, this is like pretty senior management stuff. Who are the supporting roles for this? So we have senior accountable officials for risk management, or a risk executive, that's a function, chief information officer, senior CISOs, and things of that nature. They get involved in this discussion. And like any good documentation, I love NIST documentation because it is referenced like anything. You can find different traces of information, and you can learn so much just by following this reference rabbit hole. And this is available at this link if you wish to study it further. Now, let's take a look at the same information from a compliance lens. What does that look like? If we look at basically essentially the same thing, but from a compliance standpoint, then a good reference point would be SP 853R5. What does that look like? So from a compliance lens, it looks like RA1, policies and procedures. That gives us the control. If you remember, we had a slide regarding what are the different components of a control as given to us through NIST. So we have develop, document, and disseminate. An organizational level, mission, business process level, or a system level, a risk assessment policy. Now, we are getting a little more concrete here, whereas the first couple of steps are a lot more abstract and a lot more strategic. This is a lot more functional, where this is the first place where we are going to have a product defined, which is a policy for a risk assessment. Now we are getting to the point where we've come all the way from abstract to, all right, let's define a policy to have a risk assessment. Now we're coming somewhere a little bit more concrete, which does what? Addresses purpose, scope, roles, and responsibilities. So now this is giving us the components of the risk assessment policy, where what does that need to have? It needs to have a purpose. Like, for example, it could be as simple as like, let's perform a risk assessment. Then it needs to have a scope regarding what? Let's say cybersecurity risk. Then who need to be involved? And we don't have to have these answers, you know, like we don't have to have all of these answers. We can take references from other standards. So for example, who needs to be involved? Head of the agency needs to be involved from another reference standpoint. So within the control, we have, you know, let's define roles and responsibilities, management's commitment, and other things, and make sure it's compliant with laws, regulations, executive orders, et cetera, et cetera. Then let's have some procedures in place to facilitate the implementation of risk assessment policy. Let's designate some people to actually carry it out. Let's review and update the risk assessment on a periodic basis, et cetera, et cetera. So we came at this information object of our cybersecurity risk from 3 different lenses, which is governance, risk, and compliance. And using all these 3 lenses, we are able to form a more complete picture of what exactly are we talking about. Like, what does it mean to know something? You know, so we are trying to understand all different aspects of this information object, of this logical structure. So how exactly do we optimize for compliance? There are some very simple basic steps. Understand why exactly are we optimizing the way we are looking at all this information together. One most common objective would be compliance. Find the most common controls from all these different standards and frameworks to then study the same object using different lenses, and then narrow the focus of those lenses to such a degree that we are able to utilize it, we are able to actually execute it using real world practical constraints like time, money, manpower, et cetera. And then find the most common testing and evidence requirements. So what are we trying to get compliant against? So for example, an organization might have many different compliance requirements like GDPR, like CCPA, HIPAA, PII, PCI, EPHI, et cetera, et cetera. So understanding what different compliance requirements exist, and then narrowing our focus in such a way that we are able to then find the least common denominator for compliance objects, and then try to optimize it in such a way that we can utilize very limited resources to study it and give the regulators and auditors what they need. So most optimal path to compliance. This is an example of something like that. When you follow this entire process of trying to break down everything and then going through the process of trying to study what it takes to get compliant, you end up with something like this, where you have all these different ways of trying to get compliant with something, which is NIST CSF, ISO 27001, COVID 2019, PCI DSS, GDPR, HIPAA, et cetera. And if we go back and try to remember that, like, we started to understand cybersecurity risk, and these are the different identifiers where all of that information can come together, and we can feed it into these using basically the same kind of evidence, same kind of testing, similar enough where it can get through compliance. So yes, compliance is the objective, and so many layers behind that is like trying to understand what it means to know what our cybersecurity risks are. And so the more simple it looks, the harder it was to create. And that's why multi-framework optimization is such, can be a bit of a mathematical art. Full disclosure, I have done quite a few of these with a lot more frameworks in my day jobs. And I made this last night using AI. Because, well, obviously, I can't take those things with me as I leave that job. And here's where I touch upon AI. Let's get into some memes, shall we? So what today people think about AI is nothing but statistics that is reframed as machine learning, that is reframed as artificial intelligence. And that's where a lot of confusion arises. The AIs that we have today are very, very, shall I say, acting as if they're smart. They're really good at referencing and cross-referencing information without actually understanding anything. That's why my question to you is like, how do we know that we know? What does it mean to know something? And that's where we are in cybersecurity today, on like, very high level. Like, this is an entry point, but it's very important to understand what we know so far so that we can understand what we don't know. This is where AI is at currently. And a lot of people don't know that. And this is why it's important, because AI can spit out tables like this. You can tell it exactly what it needs to know and understand to spit out a table like this. Because I'm such a massive nerd in information sciences and trying to break down information objects, like I study things from a mathematical lens. And so I know what to tell AI to get this out. And I also know when it goes wrong. And I also know what it doesn't know. And the reason why I don't know what the reason why I know that it doesn't know something is because I know it. A lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt has entered into a lot of people's minds regarding AI, because people are trying to implement it to solve problems on an industrial scale in such a way that it's starting to seem like it's eliminating jobs. In reality, all those who are pivoting too hard into AI, I want to give them a cautionary lesson that this is what AI understands about reality. If you tell AI to give you a picture of salmon in the river, this is what AI understands about salmon in the river. And unless you actually understand how AI works or can program it or create your own, you won't understand that it's actually pretty stupid. So you cannot replace human intelligence with artificial intelligence. Human intelligence, I don't know what your beliefs are, but in my belief, we were created by a much higher creator. And as lower creators, when we try to create our own version of lower creation of intelligence, we are not that good yet. So, for what it's worth, from an expert in information sciences, don't worry about AI. If I can leave you with anything at all today, yes, sir.
For that table that you developed, which one did you use?
This one?
Yeah.
ChatGPT-4. So, yeah. So if I can leave you with anything, so one of the things is that, like, if AI can do this, then what's the point in learning this complicated way of going about learning about information and knowledge and science? Because that way you know enough to understand that AI is stupid. Even if you can create a table like this, I can create a table like this because I understand the subject of that subject so well that I can make AI do this. And I also know what AI can't do. So even if you can get tables like this, and a lot of people might be fooled into thinking that, like, oh yeah, we can replace jobs with AI. You can't, especially not jobs in intelligence, cybersecurity, risk management, a lot of things that require actual abstract thinking. Like they say, you won't understand what somebody has gone through unless you walk a mile in their shoes. And pardon my language here, but like in the previous presentation, I saw somebody reference that don't reinvent the wheel. Well, there is a major advantage in reinventing the wheel. You get to learn every single lesson that they had to solve to invent the wheel in the first place. And if you have one good wheel, you can make a reference of it and then keep creating. But if you don't know how to create the first wheel and your reference frame gets broken, then you end up with things like this. So yes, there is a very important reason why you should learn how to optimize for multiple frameworks, even if somebody might tell you that, like, hey, we can just get the AI to create this. It's because people who are telling you that don't understand how AI works. So if I can leave you with anything, it's that try to reinvent more wheels and don't worry about AI. Have faith. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Without GPT, how long would it take to build that table?
For someone like me, 4 hours.
4 hours?
Yes.
And for someone not like you?
I have no idea. Yeah, like, so let's get a reference point. Like, I like to make I like to make data-based decisions. I like to stay in objectivity as much as possible. So when I say someone like me, like regardless of my own subjective opinion of myself, let's go off of objective metrics of what I have. So when I say for someone like me 4 hours, this is what it takes to actually understand the data science behind it, information science behind it.
One thing is to understand it, but to create the table.
Right, and the thing is that the table is simply a point-in-time product. The table is there as a control mechanism for to show an auditor, do I know what I'm doing? I know what I'm doing, right? The table doesn't do any work. I do the work.
Right.
You do the work. Our CTO, CIO, CISOs do the work. Our analysts do the work. What they document that they have done is not what they have done. That's only the documentation. Right? Think about it this way. When you take your car to a mechanic, and the mechanic writes you a bill, like, hey, this is what I did. The bill in itself didn't fix the car. Just because he wrote the bill doesn't mean the car is fixed. Right. He still has to fix the car. So all that table, all that documentation, all of that analysis and documentation, it's just like writing the bill. Sometimes people get confused about evidence is the work. No, evidence is not the work. When we submit, that's why it gets so abstract now in information in governance, risk, and compliance.
Right. So what you're saying or you're implying is that GPT cannot complete the tasks in that table.
GPT, even if you have complete synchronization, where you have information object manipulation done by artificial intelligence. Okay, let's get really abstract here. Like, you have a data set in a server somewhere. You have an application server with ChatGPT or like your own version of AI running on it. Okay, you can use it to manipulate data. Okay, just because you can use it to manipulate data, and it does manipulate the data, doesn't mean it did it right.
But you also have the ability to recognize when the AI ChatGPT-4 is hallucinating.
Yes.
So that you can prevent or correct in the moment as it's going through that hallucination to get it back on track to prevent your salmon in the water picture.
Right, and there is, so I'm not against automation, let's be clear about that. Like, I'm not advising against automation, but fact of the matter is, like, when you get into something as abstract as like, what is reality, what is knowledge, Like our worlds are colliding together now, like with VR and AR and like, you know, machines running so many things, such as like so many IoT devices have already come in. And, you know, whether it's a blessing and a curse that like I've seen things that are going to come in the future for like 20 years or like something like that. Like the line where like our physical reality and digital space changes is very thin even today, because think about it this way. Let's talk about it from a pure information science standpoint. A lot of what humans perceive as reality is based on psychology, right? Like there is no such thing as color. Yes, there are wavelengths and things like that, but what we see as color is actually our own imagination. Do we have consensus about that, or any differences? So
we're all sharing imagination right now?
yes, yeah, so there is objectivity. I love objectivity. Like I stick through objectivity like anything. But fact of the matter is, our brain as an information processing system is primarily subjective in nature. There is objective reality. It definitely exists. However, what you perceive is not objective reality. Right. And so take, for example, social media. Take, for example, faith and religion. Take, for example, dreams. When you step out of the house, what you experience of as reality in the senses that you are able to detect and describe, and the reality that actually exists is vastly different. And this has been proven through many experiments. I don't have references for that because I wasn't planning on getting this abstract in a GRC discussion, but you, my friend, like have actually touched on a very key discussion that we all as people need to be having, which is, let's say that, take for example, information manipulation, gaslighting. When something like that happens, it's so messed up for people on the receiving end of it that they don't even know it's happening. They know something is wrong, but like it really messes with people. And to a smaller degree, I don't want to go too off key here, but fact of the matter is, like when you take in information about anything, like let's say you take in enough information through social media from a biased source. Yes, sir?
No, you can finish your thought. I was just going to ask a question about a previous slide.
When you take in information from a biased source, it changes your neural pathways, literally. It changes the way you perceive reality to you. It literally rewires your brain, just like learning a new language, but worse. Yes, sir?
What was the thing that took you 4 hours? The chart?
No.
Okay, I'm confused. That could take
Framework optimization. If I were to do this table, follow this entire process.
Oh, the whole entire process.
Yeah, for all the frameworks that are listed, it would take me 4 hours to get to this.
Yeah. Because ChatGPT, you can just feed the parameters and it'll do that for you in like 30 seconds.
For me, yes.
Yeah.
For me.
For me too.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
For people who actually know this. People.
You gotta validate the data and make sure it's correct, and then, but it's.
You also have to put it in the same syntax. If I don't know how to use that syntax or the glue logic behind it, I'm going to get my salmon sushi in a string.
Exactly.
I can ask it, you know, for example, give me the top 10 frameworks, and also give me 3 columns with
But if you don't know it's the top 10
explanations.
frameworks, though, and it doesn't give you.
Sure, but you can look it up on Google real quickly.
And that's where we start getting a little.
You can use it as a tool, but you have to validate yourself, for sure.
Exactly. And so how do you validate something? You validate something by using the knowledge that you already have. Now, if I can start influencing the knowledge that you already have, now we're starting to get into stuff that, you know, I can't unsee.
Just 853, I can tell you it's not that easy to map. Like it needs context. It needs to be in your environment. So if you have ChatGPT generated for you, you still have a lot of work to do.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's part of the point that's being made here, maybe a little too abstractly, but
Yeah, I get that, yeah. Of course, this 853, no one's going to be able to do that with ChatGPT. Like, it's going to take a lot of abstract.
there is an industry around, like SCF is a framework for mapping controls that you can go buy. And I will tell you that even if you buy that pre-mapped set of controls, you still have a lot of work to do within your context. For one, you can't trust it because a lot of it isn't even.
100% agreed, yep. I thought this graph, I thought we were talking about this
I
right
understand
here.
that question.
Yeah, totally agreed.
Yes, ma'am.
For the compliance, you put up the policies and procedures. So in this CSF, each one of those subcategories should have a policy or procedure or both?
Okay, so let's talk about compliance. Compliance is, so what compliance attempts to do from a, this is where compliance is evolved to currently. We have different sets of experts trying to come to, the same information object essentially. Currently, where compliance folks are coming from is that, let's go from the point of view of evidence of work, the bill of repairing the truck. So currently compliance folks are looking at the bill of repairing the truck. And so that's where this table comes in, where we have, let's say, whether risk management objects are established or not. How do you verify that? You verify that from the point of view of whether you have evidence for it. What can be objectively verified? So, let's say you have this part and this part, but you don't have the third part. Then you don't meet this objective completely. And depending on the compliance standard that you're approaching at, it.
Determine whether or not you have a policy, you write a policy or
So,
procedure for it.
if you have a policy and procedure, could you please repeat your question, madam?
Okay, so like when we go through this CSF, the controls in there, and we drill down a little further, I think it was CIS that we used to go and see like, kind of cross-reference. There's a lot of them call for policies.
Yes.
And or procedures.
And procedures, yeah.
I kind of got a lot of pushback saying, no, we don't need a policy or procedure for that. We don't need it for that. But I'm like, if it's calling for it, then, or even if it's another framework or what have you, that we're, like you say, lining up those controls with or cross-referencing them. If they all say you should have one and you don't, then you don't satisfy that.
You are absolutely right.
Right?
Yes.
But
Yes, sir.
also, so depending on your business logic for whatever organization you work for, they may deem that the risk to cyber to the risk to the business might outweigh, and they can tailor out things so that way it's not part of their baseline. Now they're going to have to justify why they tailored it out, but that's a conversation that the senior leaders of that business or that federal organization have to have. Like, does it make sense to have a policy for, washing your hands before you go back to work after using the restroom? Well, yeah, because that's a health and safety issue. Or does it make sense to, do I need a policy of where employees can park compared to, non-employees, right?
So it's
But isn't that, but that's, yes, the organization can accept certain things as risk. We will accept this risk. But that is also dependent on what the certification or compliance they're going through. Say, for example, state grant. They will say you have to have this policy or this procedure in there. The organization, or like a SaaS organization, say, well, we'll accept that. But your state customer will say, no, you better write that policy, you better write that procedure, and you better follow it to
But that's a governing body, that's an authoritative body,
That's
right?
Right,
Yeah,
and that's
I'm
why
just
I'm
saying
asking that
this is
question
private
because I'm local
sector.
government in Florida.
Okay, then if the
2823185.
hierarchy, right, says you shall do,
Uh,
then.
yeah, they need to have that.
Yeah, we have to have it.
Federal government.
Yes.
We don't have the, option to say, no, we're not gonna do it.
FedRAMP, FISMA, I don't know what else would be applicable.
For the you're talking about the 2823185, that's the Florida statute.
It's a Florida statute
That's for the
for local
cybersecurity act,
government.
yeah.
I see. So that's downstream from, I haven't,
In Florida,
yeah,
Florida Digital Services is the governing body,
I'll be careful though, right? I think,
NFLD.
so FedRAMP is an organization for auditing cloud, right? FISMA is a federal government,
Right.
policy or process. Does state and local government also follow federal FISMA requirements?
State governments, or just from my experience, state governments have state grant, which is a lower form of FedRAMP. And that's so organizations that have cloud and they have states as government and not federal government, they can go and get state grant certified. And stategrant.org uses a lot of the
When it
FedRAMP.
comes to cloud, we'll be careful, right? Because sure, so we deal with a lot with cloud providers as well. And federal CIO says if you're going to be a cloud provider, you're going to have a FedRAMP authorization at the low, moderate security watermark.
Yep.
Based off of FedRAMP's RMF and guidance. But then there's an additional responsibility of the organization or a mission or system owner to do another assessment or operation to make sure that they've configured your customer managed configurations in accordance with state ramp or FedRAMP or DoD or state of Florida, right? So there's two assessments that need to have because the providers are security of the cloud, and me as a customer is security in the cloud. They're going to give me the tools, but I have to know how to use the tools and be able to encrypt my data. If I leave my S3 bucket open and it's publicly accessible, whose fault is that? It's not AWS, it's mine because I'm the knucklehead that didn't go in and do my due diligence and due care.
Mhm.
Right? So you want to be careful because we've scaled out of the scope of
GRC. Well, technically, we are still talking about compliance. And yeah, I mean, governance does imply people, process, technology. And when we have people, everything else comes into scope that we discussed. Our human brains as information processing systems, like how we perceive things, that does become important. I believe our key, first speaker of the day also addressed the fact that like cybersecurity professionals, for us, our psychology can be a vulnerability. So yeah, we're getting pretty abstract nowadays. I do believe we are,
Yeah, it's up to you guys. If you had more, so this is the last talk, so technically, like you could still, but it's up to you.
I am more than happy to have any discussions with anybody that would want to for the next hour or so, but I do want to be mindful of, yes, sir.